This is the story of Alexander the Great. But it's more than just battles, victories, and glory. It's a story about ambition, leadership, friendship, and the price of greatness. What made Alexander fearless? What gave him the courage to lead thousands of men through deserts, over mountains, and into the unknown? In this audiobook, you'll travel with Alexander through every thrilling moment, from his childhood in Macedonia, where legends were born, to the scorching sands of Egypt, to the battlefields of Persia, where he faced impossible odds and won. Grab your headphones, settle in, and prepare to step back into a world where kingdoms rose and fell with the swing of a sword. This is the story of Alexander the Great, the boy who dreamed of conquering the world, and the man who made it reality. Chapter 1. The Boy with a Lion's Heart. In the quiet hills of Macedonia, under the warm glow of the morning sun, a cry pierced the air. A baby was born. His name was Alexander. His parents, King Philip II and Queen Olympias, believed he was destined for greatness. But at that moment, he was just a child, small and full of life. No one could have known the world he would conquer. Alexander grew up in the royal palace, surrounded by luxury, but he wasn't spoiled. His mother, Olympias, told him stories of heroes and warriors. She filled his mind with tales of Achilles, the fearless warrior of Greek legend. "You," she whispered to him, "will be a hero too. You will be remembered forever." His father, King Philip, was different. He was a man of war, a man of action. He believed that strength and courage could be learned. So when Alexander was only a boy, Philip took him to the battlefield. "Watch closely," his father said. "A leader must know war before he can win it." Alexander was curious and brave. When he was just 12 years old, he met a wild horse named Bucephalus. The horse was strong but untamed. No one could ride him. Soldiers laughed when Alexander approached the beast. "Be careful, boy," one of them said. "You'll get thrown off." But Alexander didn't listen. He studied the horse's movements. He saw that Bucephalus was afraid of his own shadow. Slowly, Alexander turned the horse's head toward the sun, so the shadow disappeared. Then, he climbed onto the horse's back and held on tight. Bucephalus reared up, but Alexander didn't let go. The crowd gasped as the boy and the horse raced across the field. When they stopped, King Philip's eyes were filled with pride. "My son," he said, "Macedonia is too small for you. You must seek a bigger world." Alexander's education wasn't just about war and bravery. His father hired the famous philosopher Aristotle to teach him about science, politics, literature, and philosophy. Alexander listened carefully to every lesson. He learned about logic, reason, and the art of persuasion. But Aristotle didn't just teach him facts, he taught him how to think. A great leader, Aristotle said, is not just strong, but wise. One afternoon, Alexander asked his teacher a question. What makes a man truly great? Aristotle smiled and replied, "A man is great when he conquers not just the world, but himself. Those words stayed with Alexander. He practiced discipline and self-control. He trained his body to be strong and his mind to be sharper than a sword. But he was still a boy at heart. He laughed with his friends, raced Bucephalus through the fields, and dreamed of adventure. His dreams were big, bigger than the hills of Macedonia. He imagined distant lands, powerful enemies, and the glory of victory. One night, as he stared at the stars, he turned to his friend Hephaestion. "Do you think it's possible," Alexander whispered, "to rule the world?" His friend didn't laugh. He saw the determination in Alexander's eyes. "If anyone can," Hephaestion said, "it's you." But Alexander's journey would not be easy. His path would be filled with battles, betrayal, and danger. There would be moments of doubt, moments when even he questioned his destiny. But for now, he was a boy with a lion's heart, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world had no idea what was coming. But Alexander knew. Deep inside, he believed he was born for something great. And with Bucephalus by his side and the wisdom of Aristotle in his mind, he took his first steps toward history. Chapter 2. A king's dream becomes a son's mission. King Philip II of Macedonia was a man with a vision. His dream was simple, but not easy. Unite all of Greece under one rule. He spent years fighting battles, making alliances, and building a strong army. Step by step, he brought the Greek city-states together. But there were always problems. Some cities refused to listen, some leaders broke their promises, and in the shadows, enemies waited for Philip to fail. Alexander watched his father closely. As a young boy, he admired Philip's strength. He saw how his father commanded respect. He watched how Philip made decisions, sometimes with words, and sometimes with war. "To be a king," Philip once said, "you need more than power. You need loyalty and fear." But Alexander was not satisfied with just watching. He asked questions. He wanted to know why some battles were won and others were lost. Why do some men follow a leader and others betray him? Alexander asked one night as he sat by his father's side. Philip looked at his son and smiled. "A leader earns loyalty," he said, "but he must always be ready for betrayal." As Alexander grew older, Philip saw that his son was no ordinary boy. He was brave, yes, but he was also curious, intelligent, and ambitious. One day, Philip brought him to a war council, a meeting of generals and advisors. "Listen to their advice," Philip said, "but always trust your own mind." At first, Alexander did listen. He watched as the men debated, argued, and planned their next attack. But inside him, something stirred. A fire, a hunger. He wanted to do more than listen. He wanted to lead. He wanted to create his own destiny. Philip noticed this ambition. Some fathers might have been afraid of a son with such drive, but not Philip. Good, he thought. He is ready to dream bigger. But dreams come with a price. When Alexander turned 16, Philip left him in charge of Macedonia while he went to fight in Thrace. It was a test. If Alexander failed, his father would know he wasn't ready to lead. But if he succeeded, well, everything would change. Just days after Philip left, a rebellion broke out in a nearby city. Alexander didn't hesitate. He gathered his soldiers and marched toward the city, his heart pounding. This was his chance. The battle was short but fierce. Alexander led from the front, fighting alongside his men. His courage inspired them. His strategy outsmarted the enemy. When the dust settled, the city was under Macedonian control. The rebellion was over, and Alexander had proven himself. When Philip returned, he was proud, but cautious. "You did well," he told Alexander. "But remember, one victory is not enough. A king must win many battles and survive them all." Alexander didn't forget those words. But his thoughts were no longer on Macedonia. His mind was filled with bigger dreams. While his father focused on uniting Greece, Alexander dreamed of conquering the world. He imagined lands far beyond the mountains, deserts, and seas. He pictured cities with strange languages, gold-filled palaces, and powerful kings. Why should we stop at Greece? Alexander wondered. Why not go further? But ambition can be dangerous. Not everyone in Philip's court liked Alexander's ideas. Some saw him as arrogant. Others feared he would challenge Philip's authority. Even in his own family, there was tension. Alexander's relationship with his father grew strained. They argued more often. Alexander believed Philip was too cautious. Philip thought Alexander was reckless. "You're too impatient," Philip warned him. "You don't understand how to wait for the right moment." Alexander disagreed. "Sometimes," he replied, "the right moment is the one you create." Then tragedy struck. During a grand celebration for Philip's new marriage, disaster unfolded. Philip was assassinated. Chaos erupted. Some people feared Macedonia would fall apart without its king. But Alexander acted quickly. He took control, silenced his rivals, and secured the throne. At just 20 years old, he was now king of Macedonia. But Alexander didn't just want to follow his father's plans. He respected Philip's dream of uniting Greece, but his own dream burned brighter. He wanted more. Standing in the royal palace, he looked toward the horizon. "Father united Greece," Alexander thought. "But I will unite the world." And so his mission began. Chapter 3: A Throne of Power and Danger. The night was warm. Torches burned brightly as the music played. Macedonian nobles laughed, toasted, and celebrated King Philip's new marriage. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A man stepped forward, a knife in his hand, and stabbed the king. Gasps filled the hall. Philip II, the great warrior and king, fell to the ground. He was dead. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed in. The assassin was killed instantly. But it was too late. Philip's reign had ended. The kingdom of Macedonia was left without a leader. Far away, Alexander heard the news. His heart pounded. His father was dead. "Who did this?" he demanded. "Why?" But there was no time for grief. He couldn't cry, he couldn't hesitate. Alexander knew what was at stake. Without a king, Macedonia could fall into chaos. Enemies were waiting for this moment, waiting to strike. Alexander was only 20 years old. Young, yes, but weak? Number. He rode back to the capital, his mind racing. His father had taught him well. Now it was time to prove it. The throne was his, but he knew that power did not come freely. He had to fight for it. His first challenge came quickly. Some nobles in Macedonia didn't want him as king. They thought he was too young, too inexperienced. They whispered behind closed doors. They talked of rebellion. Alexander acted fast. He gathered his trusted men and stormed the homes of his enemies. His message was clear: obey me or face the consequences. Many surrendered. Those who didn't were killed. But the danger wasn't over. Outside Macedonia, Greek city-states heard of Philip's death. Some thought it was their chance to break free. They believed Macedonia was weak without Philip. Athens and Thebes, two of the most powerful Greek cities, prepared for rebellion. Alexander's advisors warned him. "You should wait," they said. "You need more time." But Alexander shook his head. "If we wait," he replied, "they will grow stronger. We must act now." With lightning speed, Alexander marched south with his army. He led them through rough terrain and narrow mountain passes. His soldiers respected him because he didn't just give orders. He fought alongside them. His bravery inspired them. When Alexander reached Thebes, he gave the city one chance. "Surrender," he said, "and no harm will come to you." But Thebes refused. They thought they could defeat the young king. They were wrong. The battle was fierce. The sound of swords clashing and arrows flying filled the air. Alexander led the charge, his sword flashing in the sunlight. His strategy was brilliant. His soldiers surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and forcing Thebes into a corner. Finally, the city fell. Thebes was destroyed, its walls torn down. The message to Greece was clear. Alexander was not a boy. He was a king, and a dangerous one. News of Thebes' destruction spread quickly. Other Greek cities, including Athens, backed down. They knew that fighting Alexander would mean certain defeat. For now, Greece was under his control. But Alexander's work wasn't finished. Back in Macedonia, there were still threats to his throne. Tribes in the north were preparing to rebel. Once again, Alexander didn't wait. He led his army to the northern borders, where he crushed the rebellions with speed and force. His enemies couldn't believe how quickly he acted. But victory wasn't just about war. Alexander knew he needed more than fear to rule. He needed loyalty. He rewarded those who supported him. He made alliances with local leaders. He showed kindness when it was needed, and strength when it wasn't. One night, after another victory, Alexander stood by the fire with his closest friends. He looked into the flames and thought of his father. "He taught me everything," Alexander whispered, "but now I must do what he never could." His friends nodded in agreement. They knew what he meant. Philip had united Greece, But Alexander dreamed of conquering lands far beyond. His throne was secure. The nobles respected him. The soldiers trusted him. His enemies feared him. But Alexander wasn't satisfied. His eyes turned east, toward the Persian Empire, a land of riches, power, and danger. For now, the fires of rebellion in Macedonia had been put out. But Alexander's journey had just begun. In the quiet of the night, he made a promise to himself. He would not just be king of Macedonia. He would be king of the world. And so, the young king prepared for his next challenge. His enemies would be many, his battles fierce. But with ambition burning in his heart, Alexander knew one thing. He was ready. The world had no idea what was coming. Chapter 4: Uniting Greece and Breaking Its Chains. The sun rose over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields of Greece. But beneath this peaceful sky, tension was building. Greece was divided. City-states like Athens, Sparta, and Thebes had their own leaders, their own armies, and their own dreams. They did not like being controlled by Macedonia. Many saw the death of King Philip as their chance to break free. They thought Alexander was young and weak. They were wrong. In the city of Thebes, rebellion was growing. Leaders whispered in secret meetings. "We don't need Macedon," they said. "We can be free again." Messages were sent to Athens and other cities, asking for help. Weapons were sharpened. Soldiers prepared for battle. Thebes believed it could defeat Alexander, but Alexander was already on his way. He marched south with his army, moving fast through mountains and valleys. His soldiers respected him. He wasn't just their king. He was their leader in battle. He ate with them, slept beside them, and fought alongside them. When they were cold, he was cold. When they were tired, he kept them going. He had earned their loyalty. As they approached Thebes, the city's walls came into view. Thick and tall, the walls seemed impossible to break. Inside, the people of Thebes felt safe. They had fought many battles before. They believed they could win again. But Alexander had a plan. Before the battle began, he sent a message to the leaders of Thebes. "Surrender now," the message said, "and no harm will come to you. Resist, and your city will burn." The leaders of Thebes laughed. They thought Alexander was bluffing. They had heard stories of his bravery, but they didn't believe he could defeat them. They refused to surrender. The next morning, the sound of drums echoed through the air. Alexander's soldiers lined up outside the city gates. The ground shook beneath the hooves of their horses. The people of Thebes watched from the walls. They shouted insults, throwing stones and arrows. But Alexander didn't react. He stayed calm. He knew that patience could win battles. Then, with a sudden command, the attack began. Arrows flew through the air, darkening the sky. The clash of swords and shields filled the battlefield. Alexander led his men forward, charging toward the gates. He was not a king who stood back and watched. He was in the middle of the fight, his sword shining in the sun. "Push forward," he shouted. His voice was steady. strong. We will win this day. Thebes fought back with everything it had. Soldiers defended the gates. Archers fired from the walls. The city's warriors were brave, but Alexander's army was stronger. His men broke through the gates and poured into the streets. House by house, street by street, they fought their way through the city. Suddenly, Alexander spotted a group of Theban soldiers retreating toward the central square. He raised his hand, signaling his men to follow. They charged, cutting off the soldiers' escape. In the chaos, the leaders of Thebes realized they had lost. Their city was falling. By nightfall, the battle was over. Smoke rose into the sky. Fires burned through the streets. The mighty city of Thebes had been defeated. Its walls, once thought to be unbreakable, now lay in ruins. The people of Greece were in shock. How could this young king have done what seemed impossible? Alexander stood in the middle of the ruined city, his face calm, but his eyes burning with determination. He had shown Greece that he was not just Philip's son. He was a force of his own. But the victory was not just about destruction. Alexander wanted Greece to understand one thing: unity was better than rebellion. He believed that if Greece could unite under his leadership, they could achieve greatness together. He spared many of the surviving Thebans, allowing them to leave the city and rebuild their lives elsewhere. But the message was clear. Defiance would not be tolerated. When word of Thebes' defeat reached Athens, the city leaders were terrified. They knew that fighting Alexander would be a mistake. They sent envoys to negotiate peace, and other cities followed their example. One by one, they agreed to unite under Alexander's rule. That night, Alexander sat by the fire with his generals. The battle was won, but his mind was already on the future. "Greece is mine," he said softly, "but this is only the beginning. There is a world beyond these mountains, and it will be ours." The men around him nodded. They could see the fire in his eyes. They knew that he would not stop until his dream of conquest became reality. But for now, Greece was united. The chains of rebellion had been broken, and Alexander was ready for his next challenge. Chapter 5. Facing the Persian Giant. The sea sparkled under the morning sun. Waves rolled gently, rocking the ships as they carried Alexander and his army across the Aegean Sea. The air was filled with salt, the sound of seagulls, and the quiet murmur of men preparing for war. They were heading toward Asia Minor, the western edge of the mighty Persian Empire. Persia was enormous. Its lands stretched from the mountains of Turkey to the deserts of Egypt, all the way to India. Its king, Darius III, had a vast army, thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, hundreds of war chariots. Alexander knew the odds were against him, but he wasn't afraid. Standing on the deck of his ship, he gazed at the horizon. Behind him, Greece was safe and united. Ahead of him lay his greatest challenge. He gripped the wooden railing and whispered, "We will win. No matter how big they are." When the ships reached the coast, Alexander's soldiers disembarked, their boots sinking into the sandy shore. They carried their swords, shields, and dreams of victory. But some were nervous. They had heard stories of the Persian army's size and strength. "Can we really defeat them?" one soldier asked his friend. The friend shrugged, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Alexander noticed their doubts. That night, as the soldiers set up camp, he walked among them. He didn't shout orders. He didn't give long speeches. He simply looked them in the eye and spoke from the heart. "Remember," he said, "they fight for a king who stays in his palace. But we fight for each other. We fight for glory. Together, we are unstoppable." His words lit a fire in their hearts. The soldiers knew that Alexander wouldn't just lead them. He would fight beside them. The next morning, they marched inland. The Persian satraps, governors of the region, had gathered their forces near the Granicus River. Alexander's scouts warned him. The enemy was waiting on the other side of the river, ready to attack. But Alexander didn't hesitate. He studied the terrain and made a plan. "We will cross the river," he said. "We will attack head-on and show them what Macedonians are made of." The soldiers obeyed. They trusted him completely. The battle began with a thunderous roar. Alexander led the charge, riding his beloved horse, Bucephalus. Water splashed around them as they crossed the river. Arrows flew through the air like deadly rain. Persian cavalry galloped toward them, their spears aimed at Alexander's men. The clash of metal rang out across the battlefield. Swords struck shields. Horses whinnied in panic. Men shouted orders and cries of pain filled the air. But in the midst of chaos, Alexander was calm. He fought with precision and courage. His sword flashed in the sunlight as he cut down enemies who dared to block his path. At one point, a Persian noble charged directly at him, his spear aimed at Alexander's chest. Time seemed to slow down. The spear came closer and closer. But just before it hit, Alexander leaned to the side and thrust his sword forward. The noble fell to the ground, lifeless. The Macedonian soldiers saw their leader's bravery, and it inspired them. They pushed harder, fighting with everything they had. Step by step, they forced the Persians back. The river, once a barrier, was now behind them. Victory was within reach. Darius's governors tried to regroup their forces, but it was too late. Alexander's strategy had worked perfectly. The Persian lines broke. Some soldiers surrendered, others fled. The battlefield was littered with fallen warriors, broken weapons, and shattered shields. The Granicus River, once calm, now carried the echoes of defeat. When the fighting ended, Alexander stood on the hill overlooking the battlefield. His armor was stained with dirt and blood, but his spirit was untouched. His men gathered around him, exhausted but victorious. They had faced the Persian giant and won. That night, as the campfires flickered, the soldiers celebrated their triumph. They sang songs of glory, drank to their fallen comrades, and told stories of Alexander's bravery. But while they rested, Alexander was already thinking ahead. This was only the beginning. Darius III would not ignore this defeat. He would gather a larger army, and the next battle would be even harder. Alexander walked alone to the edge of the camp, where the stars lit up the night sky. He looked east toward the heart of Persia. "Darius will come," he said softly, "but we'll be ready." For now, they had proven that the Persian Empire was not invincible. They had taken the first step toward greatness, and Alexander was just getting started. Before we begin, Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. Victory at the River Granicus. The morning was cold. Mist drifted over the Granicus River, making the water shimmer like silver. The air smelled of wet grass and damp earth. Birds called out in the distance, but their songs were soon drowned by the sounds of marching soldiers. The Macedonian army was on the move. Alexander rode at the front, his armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. His horse, Bucephalus, snorted and stamped its hooves, eager for the battle ahead. Behind them, thousands of men marched in step, their shields clanking softly against their sides. They had trained for this. They were ready. But in their hearts, some felt fear. On the opposite side of the river, the Persian army waited. They were well prepared. Their commanders had set up a strong defense with cavalry stationed along the riverbank. Their horses pawed at the ground, their riders holding long spears pointed toward the water. The Persian infantry stood behind them, forming a solid wall of shields and swords. The message was clear. If Alexander tried to cross the river, he would be stopped. Alexander's generals gathered around him, their faces serious. One of them, Parmenion, spoke first. "We should wait," he said. "Crossing the river now is dangerous. The current is strong, and the Persians have the high ground. If we attack, we could lose many men." Alexander listened but did not agree. He could see the fear in some of his generals' eyes, but fear would not win them this battle. Confidence and strategy would. "No," Alexander replied firmly. "If we wait, the Persians will only grow stronger. We must strike now, while they still underestimate us." Parmenion hesitated, but nodded. He knew that once Alexander made a decision, there was no changing it. The young general had a vision, and his men trusted him to lead them to victory. Alexander turned to his soldiers, who stood in silence, waiting for orders. He raised his sword high. "Today," he shouted, "we fight for glory. We fight to prove that Macedonia is greater than any empire. Follow me, and together, we will win this battle." The soldiers cheered, their voices echoing across the river. Their fear melted away, replaced by the fire of determination. They gripped their weapons tightly, ready to follow their king into the unknown. Then, With a loud command, Alexander led the charge. The first wave of Macedonian soldiers splashed into the icy water. The river was deeper and faster than it looked. Some men struggled to keep their balance, but they pushed forward. Arrows whizzed past them, splashing into the water or striking shields. The Persian archers were relentless, firing from the high ground. But Alexander kept going. His eyes were fixed on the enemy, and his heart beat like a war drum. When the Macedonians reached the other side, chaos exploded. The Persian cavalry charged, their horses thundering toward Alexander and his men. The ground shook beneath their hooves. The clanging of metal filled the air as swords clashed against shields. Alexander fought at the front, swinging his sword with precision. His blows were strong, his movements quick. Every time an enemy came near, he struck with deadly accuracy. Suddenly, a Persian soldier on horseback charged directly at him, raising his spear. The soldier's eyes were full of rage. Alexander tightened his grip on the reins of Bucephalus and waited for the right moment. As the soldier thrust the spear forward, Alexander leaned to the side and slashed upward with his sword. The spear broke in half, and the soldier fell from his horse. Bucephalus reared up, neighing loudly. Alexander steadied him and looked around. His men were still fighting, but they were outnumbered. The Persians had more cavalry and the advantage of the high ground. For a moment, it seemed the battle could go either way. But Alexander was not finished. He signaled for his second line of soldiers to join the fight. Fresh reinforcements waded through the river and charged up the banks, flanking the Persian forces. The Persians were caught off guard. They had expected to crush the first wave of attackers quickly, but now they were surrounded on both sides. The tide of the battle began to change. Macedonian spears pierced through Persian armor. Swords clanged against shields. Horses whinnied in fear and confusion. Alexander's men fought with everything they had, their muscles aching, but their spirits unbreakable. They knew their king was watching. They could not let him down. Then something remarkable happened. The Persian commanders, seeing their forces crumble, panicked. Instead of rallying their men, they fled the battlefield, leaving their soldiers leaderless. Without direction, the Persian army fell into chaos. Some tried to fight, but most dropped their weapons and ran. The battle was over. Alexander stood on the riverbank, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. His armor was stained with dirt and blood, but his eyes sparkled with victory. He looked over the battlefield, where his soldiers were cheering and embracing one another. The Granicus River, once a barrier, was now a symbol of triumph. Parmenion approached him, shaking his head in amazement. "You were right," he said. "We struck at the perfect moment." Alexander smiled. "Victory favors the bold," he replied, "and today we were bold." That night, the Macedonian camp was filled with celebration. Fires crackled as soldiers shared stories of their bravery. They ate, drank, and sang songs of glory. But Alexander did not join them for long. He sat quietly by the fire, sharpening his sword and thinking of the future. He knew this battle was just the beginning. The Persian Empire was vast, and King Darius III would not take this defeat lightly. But Alexander wasn't afraid. He had faced the Persian giant once, and won. He knew he could do it again. As the fire crackled and the stars shone above, Alexander made a silent promise. He would not stop until the Persian Empire was his. And with that thought, he rested, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 7. The Gordian Knot, a Legend Untied. The sun hung low over the city of Gordium, casting long shadows across its ancient walls. The air was warm, filled with the scent of dust and distant flowers. Alexander rode through the city gates, his men following closely behind. Villagers peeked out from doorways, whispering as they watched the young king pass by. They had heard the stories about his bravery, his battles, and his ambition. But today, Alexander wasn't here to fight. He was here for a different challenge. At the center of the city stood an old temple. Inside it lay something that had puzzled and defeated many men before him: the Gordian Knot. Legend said it had been tied by King Gordius, the founder of the city. The knot was large, thick, and tangled, made of rough, twisted ropes. No one knew exactly how it had been tied, but one thing was certain: no one had ever untied it. Alexander dismounted from his horse and approached the temple steps. His boots crunched against the stone floor as he entered the dimly lit chamber. There, in front of him, was the knot. It looked almost alive, its loops and twists forming a maze of endless complexity. His generals stood behind him, watching silently. A man from the city spoke. His voice was low and serious. The prophecy says that whoever unties this knot will become the ruler of all Asia. Alexander stared at the knot. He circled it slowly, studying every loop, every twist. His mind raced. Many before him had tried to solve this puzzle and failed. They had pulled, twisted, and struggled. But the knot remained firm. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the wind. His soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure of what their king would do. Some whispered among themselves. "Can it really be untied?" one asked. Another replied, "If anyone can do it, it's Alexander." Alexander didn't respond to their doubts. He had learned long ago that hesitation was the enemy of success. He reached out and touched the thick, rough rope. It was stronger than he had expected, its fibers stiff from age. He tugged gently on one loop, but the knot only tightened. He tried another loop, pulling harder this time. But still, the knot didn't budge. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but Alexander didn't panic. He stepped back and crossed his arms, thinking. His eyes narrowed as he studied the knot from a distance. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. He had an idea that was bold, unconventional, and exactly what the moment required. Without saying a word, Alexander drew his sword. The metal glinted in the sunlight streaming through the temple windows. His generals gasped. "What is he doing?" one of them whispered. But Alexander didn't hesitate. With one powerful swing, he brought the blade down, slicing through the thick ropes in a single stroke. The knot fell apart, its tangled loops unraveling onto the floor. For a moment, there was silence. No one moved. Then, a murmur spread through the crowd. The man from the city stepped forward, his eyes wide with shock. "You have untied the Gordian knot," he said softly. "The prophecy is fulfilled." Alexander sheathed his sword and turned to face his men. "Sometimes," he said, "the best way to solve a problem is not to solve it at all, but to think differently." His voice was calm, but there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. He had done what others could not through brute force, but through bold thinking. Outside the temple, news of Alexander's victory spread quickly. The people of Gordium gathered in the streets, cheering and celebrating. To them, the prophecy meant that Alexander was destined for greatness. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was chosen by fate. That night, Alexander sat by the fire with his closest friends. The flames crackled, casting flickering shadows on their faces. One of them, Hephaestion, leaned forward. "Did you know that would work?" he asked, smiling. Alexander chuckled and shook his head. "No," he admitted, "but I knew one thing. If I had done what everyone else did, I would have failed. Sometimes victory isn't about strength. It's about daring to do what others won't." He looked up at the stars, his mind already thinking of the future. The Persian Empire was vast and powerful, but Alexander believed it could be conquered. The Gordian knot had been just one challenge of many. Ahead of him lay battles, dangers, and obstacles far greater. But tonight, he allowed himself to enjoy this small victory. The next morning, as the sun rose over Gordium, Alexander and his army prepared to leave. The villagers waved from their doorways, wishing him luck on his journey. As they marched out of the city, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. The prophecy was on his side. His destiny was calling. And now, nothing seemed impossible. With each step, the sound of marching boots echoed across the land, carrying with them the promise of future triumphs. Alexander had untied the unbreakable knot. What could stop him now? Nothing. Chapter 8. The Battle of Issus. Outnumbered, but unstoppable. The sky was dark, filled with heavy clouds. A cold wind swept across the plain, rustling the tall grass. In the distance, the sound of marching feet and clanking armor echoed. Alexander's army had arrived at the narrow plains near Issus. They were tired, but their eyes were sharp and their spirits were high. They knew what was coming. On the other side of the battlefield, King Darius III stood with his massive Persian army. His soldiers stretched as far as the eye could see. There were thousands of cavalry, foot soldiers, and archers. Their armor glittered. Their spears formed walls of iron. The ground trembled under the weight of their horses. It seemed like an ocean of warriors, endless and unstoppable. Alexander stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield. His generals gathered around him, waiting for orders. Parmenion, his trusted adviser, looked concerned. "We are outnumbered," he said. "They have twice as many soldiers as we do, maybe more." He pointed toward the Persian camp, where torches lit the night like stars. "If we attack and fail, everything we've built will be lost." Alexander didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the Persian camp, studying every movement, every formation. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He knew his men were counting on him. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Finally, he spoke. "We are not here to count numbers," he said calmly. "We are here to win." He turned to his generals, his voice growing stronger. "Darius has a large army, but size doesn't win battles. Strategy does. And tonight, we will show them what Macedonians are made of." The generals nodded, their confidence returning. Alexander's words were like sparks, igniting the fire in their hearts. At dawn, the battle began. Alexander divided his army into several groups, placing the cavalry on the flanks and the infantry in the center. He had studied the terrain carefully. The battlefield was narrow, surrounded by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. The Persian army couldn't spread out as much as they wanted. Their large numbers became less useful in the confined space. The sound of horns signaled the attack. Alexander, riding Bucephalus, led the cavalry on the right flank. The ground shook as the horses galloped forward. The clash of metal rang out as they slammed into the Persian line. Swords sliced through the air, shields blocked arrows, and the screams of battle filled the air. The Persians fought back fiercely. Their archers fired arrows in waves, creating a deadly rain. Macedonian soldiers raised their shields, forming a protective wall. Alexander moved swiftly, slashing through enemy lines and directing his men with precision. "Hold your ground," he shouted. "Don't let them push you back." Meanwhile, the Persian cavalry tried to break through the Macedonian left flank. Parmenion was in charge there, and he fought like a lion. His men stood firm, their spears forming an impenetrable barrier. The Persians were strong, but the Macedonians were determined. They fought as if their lives depended on it, because they did. In the chaos, Alexander spotted King Darius III in his war chariot, surrounded by bodyguards. The Persian king wore a golden crown and a long robe embroidered with jewels. He looked confident, but Alexander saw something else in his eyes. Fear. Darius knew that if he lost this battle, his empire could crumble. Alexander smiled grimly. He knew what he had to do. "Follow me," he yelled, charging toward Darius's position. His cavalry cut through the Persian ranks like a knife through cloth. Soldiers tried to block their path, but they were no match for Alexander's speed and strategy. Arrows whizzed past him, but he didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on Darius. The closer he got, the more panicked the Persian soldiers became. They had never seen an enemy so fearless, so relentless. Darius's chariot driver tried to steer them away, but it was too late. The Macedonians were closing in. Then, something remarkable happened. Darius, the great king of Persia, abandoned his chariot. He leapt to the ground and fled on horseback, leaving his army behind. His bodyguards tried to protect him, but the sight of their king running for his life broke their morale. The Persian soldiers began to retreat. Alexander's men cheered as they saw the enemy falling back. Victory was within reach, but Alexander didn't stop. He chased the retreating forces, making sure they couldn't regroup. "Press on!" he shouted. "Don't give them a chance to recover." The battlefield was a blur of movement, soldiers running, horses galloping, swords clashing. But by nightfall, the noise began to fade. The Persian army was defeated. The Macedonians stood victorious. Alexander dismounted from Bucephalus, his armor stained with dirt and blood. His breath was heavy, but his heart was light. He had done it. He had turned the impossible into reality. His generals gathered around him, smiling and congratulating him. But Alexander's mind was already racing ahead. He knew that this victory was only the beginning. Darius had escaped, and as long as he lived, the war was not over. That night, Alexander walked through the Macedonian camp. Soldiers were celebrating, singing songs of glory and sharing stories of their bravery. Fires crackled, casting warm light across their faces, but Alexander didn't join them. Instead, he stood by the river, staring at his reflection in the water. He thought about the men who had died today, their sacrifices, and the battles that still lay ahead. "Victory is never final," he whispered to himself. "It's just the next step." As the stars twinkled above him, Alexander made a silent vow. He would not stop until Darius was defeated, and the Persian Empire was his. For now, he would let his men enjoy their victory. But tomorrow, the march would continue. Alexander was unstoppable. His destiny awaited, and the world was about to change forever. Chapter 9. Egypt, the land that made him a leader. The hot desert wind blew gently across the Nile River, rustling the palm trees along its banks. Alexander's army had arrived in Egypt, a land of ancient wonders and rich culture. The pyramids stood tall in the distance, silent witnesses to the passing of centuries. But this was no ordinary invasion. There was no war. There were no battles. Instead, Egypt welcomed Alexander with open arms, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. For years, Egypt had been under Persian rule. The people had grown tired of foreign control and longed for change. When they heard that Alexander had defeated the Persian king, Darius III, they saw him as a symbol of freedom. They believed he would respect their traditions and help them rebuild their strength. Alexander, always a man of strategy, knew the importance of winning hearts, not just battles. As he marched through Egyptian cities, he made sure to show respect for their culture and leaders. He didn't destroy temples or force new rules on them. Instead, he listened to their advisors and allowed them to keep many of their customs. His diplomacy earned their trust quickly. In the ancient city of Memphis, a grand ceremony was held to honor Alexander as the new ruler of Egypt. Crowds gathered to watch as local leaders presented him with gifts of gold and precious stones. Musicians played traditional songs, and dancers performed in colorful robes. It wasn't just a political moment, it was a celebration of hope. The people believed that with Alexander as their leader, Egypt could prosper once again. But Alexander's ambitions stretched far beyond ruling Egypt. He wanted to leave behind something lasting, something that would outlive him and shape the future. As he traveled along the Nile, he found the perfect location to build a city that would carry his name, Alexandria. Alexandria was strategically located near the Mediterranean Sea, making it an ideal center for trade and culture. Alexander imagined a city that would bring people together from different parts of the world. He wanted it to be a hub of learning, innovation, and commerce. "This city will be my greatest gift to Egypt," he told his advisors. Construction began quickly. Architects and engineers from Greece, Egypt, and other regions worked together to design grand buildings, wide streets, and marketplaces. The heart of the city, Alexander envisioned a library that would hold knowledge from every corner of the world. Scholars, poets, and philosophers would come to study and share ideas. Although Alexander would not live to see its completion, his vision became a reality. Alexandria would later become one of the most important cultural centers of the ancient world. During his time in Egypt, Alexander also focused on practical matters. He improved irrigation systems to ensure that farmers could grow crops efficiently. He encouraged the development of ports and harbors to boost trade with nearby regions. He understood that a successful leader was not just a warrior, but someone who could help a country thrive in peace. As Alexander toured the construction of Alexandria, he often walked among the workers, asking them about their progress. He treated them with respect, understanding that they were the ones building his legacy. He spoke about his plans for the city with excitement, describing how it would connect Egypt to the rest of the world. "One day," he said, "people from faraway lands will come here to learn and trade. They will remember what we built together." But even as the city grew, Alexander's mind was already on the next challenge. The Persian king, Darius III, had not yet been captured. His army was weakened, but he was still a threat. Alexander knew that if he wanted to secure his empire, he would have to defeat Darius once and for all. Before leaving Egypt, Alexander made sure that the local leaders were in place to govern the region. He didn't believe in ruling every city himself. He trusted his appointed officials to maintain order and continue the progress he had started. "Protect this land," he told them. "It is now part of something greater." As his army prepared to march east, many of his men were eager to leave Egypt behind and continue their journey. But others had grown attached to the peaceful life they had experienced there. They enjoyed the rich food, warm climate, and friendly people. For a moment, they wondered if this could have been the place to settle down and rest. But they knew that with Alexander as their leader, the march would never stop. The morning they left Egypt, the sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the Nile. Alexander took one last look at the land he had come to admire. In a short time, he had secured its loyalty, improved its infrastructure, and laid the foundation for a city that would shine for centuries. As the soldiers marched away from the river, Alexander's thoughts were already on the battles ahead. Egypt had been a success, but his dream was far from complete. His mind raced with visions of victory and expansion. He believed that one day people would speak of his name in every corner of the world. And they did. Long after his death, Alexandria flourished. The library became a beacon of knowledge, attracting thinkers from Greece, India, Persia, and beyond. The blending of cultures in the city helped create innovations in science, mathematics, and literature. Trade routes expanded, bringing goods and ideas from distant lands. The legacy Alexander had imagined became real, even though he never returned to see it. In the end, Egypt was not just a place Alexander conquered. It was a place that transformed him. Here, he learned that being a leader meant more than winning battles. It meant building something meaningful, something that could last. And in Alexandria, he left behind a symbol of his vision. A vision that would influence history for generations. The man who had arrived as a liberator left as a visionary leader, carrying with him the lessons of Egypt as he marched toward his next great challenge. Chapter 10. The Final Showdown. The Battle of Gaugamela. The moon cast its pale light over the desert, shining on the campfires of Alexander's army. The night was quiet, but there was tension in the air. Soldiers sat by the fire, sharpening their swords and whispering prayers. Tomorrow, they would face the largest army they had ever seen. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. Alexander stood at the edge of the camp, looking out at the darkness. His thoughts raced. Across the plain, King Darius III of Persia was preparing his forces. His army was massive, over 100,000 men, including cavalry, archers, and war chariots with blades on their wheels. The Persian king wanted this battle to be Alexander's final defeat. But Alexander was not afraid. He had fought against the odds before. At the Battle of Issus, he had defeated a larger Persian army. At the Granicus River, he had shown the world that size did not matter if you had the right strategy. He knew that tomorrow would be the ultimate test. His reputation, his army, and his dream of ruling Asia all depended on victory. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, Alexander called his generals together. His plan was simple but risky. He would not wait for the Persians to attack. Instead, he would strike first. "We must hit them hard," he said, his voice steady. "Their size is their weakness. They are too big to move quickly. If we control the speed of the battle, we can win." Parmenion, his trusted general, nodded but looked worried. Darius has war chariots," he said. "Their blades can cut through our ranks like knives through cloth." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "We will let them charge," he replied. "Then we'll open gaps in our lines. When the chariots pass through, we'll close the gaps and attack them from behind. Their chariots will be useless." The generals exchanged glances. It was a bold plan, but they had seen Alexander's boldness work before. They trusted him. As the sun began to rise, the Macedonian army marched onto the battlefield. The ground was flat and dusty, stretching endlessly in all directions. In the distance, the Persian army was a sea of soldiers, horses, and chariots. Banners flapped in the wind, and the sound of drums echoed across the plain. Darius sat in his royal chariot, surrounded by guards. He wore a golden robe, and his crown glistened in the morning light. He looked confident, but deep down, he was nervous. He knew what Alexander was capable of. Alexander rode Bucephalus to the front of his troops. He raised his sword high and shouted, "Today we fight for victory, for glory, for everything we have built." His men cheered, their voices rising like thunder. The battle began with the blast of horns. The Persian cavalry charged first, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The ground shook under the weight of their advance. Alexander ordered his cavalry to meet them head-on. The two forces collided with a deafening crash. Horses neighed, men shouted, and the clash of swords rang out like a drumbeat. At the same time, the Persian war chariots thundered across the field, their bladed wheels spinning dangerously. The chariots raced toward the Macedonian lines. Alexander watched closely. "Hold your ground," he commanded. His soldiers gripped their shields tightly, their knuckles turning white. The chariots sped closer and closer until they were only moments away. Then, just as Alexander had planned, the Macedonian soldiers opened gaps in their formation. The chariots, unable to stop, charged through the empty spaces. But on the other side, waiting soldiers closed in and attacked the chariots from behind. Drivers were pulled from their seats, and horses were brought down. The threat of the chariots was neutralized. Alexander saw his opportunity. "Now!" he shouted, leading a charge directly toward the center of the Persian line. His cavalry pushed forward with incredible speed, cutting through the enemy ranks. Alexander fought at the front, his sword flashing in the sunlight. He struck down enemies with precision, his movements quick and deadly. Bucephalus, loyal and fearless, carried him through the chaos. Darius watched in horror as his army began to falter. His soldiers, seeing Alexander cut through their lines, began to lose confidence. Panic spread like wildfire. Some tried to hold their positions, but many turned and ran. Seeing the collapse, Darius knew he had to act quickly. He ordered his chariot driver to retreat. The great king of Persia, once proud and confident, was now fleeing the battlefield. His guards tried to cover his escape, but the damage was done. His army saw their leader running, and they followed. Alexander did not stop. He pursued the retreating forces, making sure they could not regroup. The desert echoed with the sounds of fleeing men, galloping horses, and the victorious shouts of Macedonian soldiers. By nightfall, the battle was over. The once mighty Persian army had been defeated. The battlefield was littered with broken shields, abandoned weapons, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and victory. Alexander stood on a hill, looking out over the scene. His armor was stained and his muscles ached, but he felt a surge of pride. He had done it. The Persian Empire was his. Darius had escaped, but without his army, he was powerless. Parmenion approached him, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. "We have won," he said. Alexander nodded. "Yes," he replied softly, "but this is not the end. There are still lands to conquer." That night, the Macedonian camp was alive with celebration. Soldiers laughed, sang, and shared stories of their bravery. Fires crackled, casting warm light on their faces. But Alexander did not join them for long. He stood alone under the stars, thinking about what lay ahead. He knew that even though he had won the battle, his journey was far from over. He would chase Darius, secure the rest of the empire, and continue expanding his legacy. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. The Battle of Gaugamela was over, but the legend of Alexander the Great had only just begun. Chapter 11. Beyond Persia, the edge of the known world. The Persian Empire had fallen. Its great cities, Babylon, Persepolis, and Susa, were now under Alexander's control. Gold, treasure, and royal palaces belonged to him. But for Alexander, this was not the end. His dream was much larger. He wanted to march beyond Persia, to lands unknown to the Greeks. He wanted to see how far the world stretched and conquer whatever lay ahead. Standing on the balcony of a palace in Babylon, he gazed at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The air was warm, but Alexander's thoughts were colder. Victory had been sweet, but it wasn't enough. There was always more to achieve, always another land to conquer. "East," he whispered to himself. "We must keep going." The next morning, Alexander announced his plan to the army. They would march east, into lands of fierce tribes, high mountains, and vast deserts. Some soldiers cheered. They believed in Alexander's vision. They had seen him win battle after battle and trusted him to lead them to more glory. But not everyone felt the same. As the days passed and the army began its journey, whispers spread through the camp. Many soldiers were tired. They had been marching and fighting for years, far from their homes in Macedonia. They missed their families. They missed the familiar food, music, and traditions of home. They wondered if this endless march was worth it. In a dimly lit tent one night, a group of soldiers sat together, their faces serious. One of them spoke softly. "How long will we keep following him? We've already taken Persia. Isn't that enough?" Another soldier nodded. "We've crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains. How many more battles will we fight before we can go home?" But Alexander was not a man who accepted limits. As the army marched through deserts where the sun burned like fire, he encouraged them to push forward. When they crossed freezing rivers with waters that bit their skin, he was at the front, leading them through. In the mountains, when supplies ran low and soldiers grew weak, Alexander ate the same simple food as his men and drank from the same small water rations. He knew that to keep their loyalty, he had to share their hardships. But even his strength was tested. One day, as they crossed a harsh desert, a group of scouts found a small spring of water. They filled a helmet with precious water and brought it to Alexander. The men watched as the water was offered to him. His lips were dry. His throat burned. He could have taken a sip and no one would have blamed him. But instead, Alexander lifted the helmet high and poured the water onto the hot sand. The soldiers gasped. Some were confused, others were inspired. Alexander looked at them and said, "If my men cannot drink, then neither will I." The soldiers cheered. For a moment, their exhaustion was forgotten. Their king had reminded them why they followed him, because he wasn't just a commander. He was one of them. But even loyalty had its limits. As they marched into the lands of what is now modern-day Afghanistan, they faced new dangers. The terrain was rough, filled with rocky paths and narrow valleys. The tribes there did not surrender like the Persians. They fought fiercely, using guerrilla tactics to ambush Alexander's men. Every night, the soldiers had to guard their camps carefully, fearing surprise attacks. Despite the dangers, Alexander pushed on. He believed that every challenge was a test of their greatness. But his men grew weary. In private, some of the generals, including Parmenion and Conus, began to question Alexander's decisions. They respected him, but they worried that his ambition had no end. One evening, Conus approached Alexander. The fire between them crackled, casting shadows on their faces. Conus hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "Alexander," he said, "we have followed you through every battle. We have crossed deserts and rivers. We have given everything. But the men are tired. They need rest. They need to return home." Alexander's eyes flashed with emotion, anger, frustration, and something else, sadness. He knew his men were suffering, but he couldn't let go of his dream. He stood and paced around the fire, his fists clenched. "Do you think the world will remember men who stopped halfway?" he asked. "Do you think legends are made by those who turn back?" Conus sighed. "No," he said, "but even legends need loyal men. And loyalty fades when men lose hope." Alexander stared into the flames, silent. Deep down, he knew Conus was right. His men had given everything. They had risked their lives for him, and many had died along the way. But his heart ached at the thought of stopping. The edge of the world was so close, or so he believed. The next day, the army reached the banks of the Hyphasis River, now known as the Bees River. On the other side lay India, a land of jungles, elephants, and new challenges. Alexander stood by the riverbank, staring across the water. He wanted to keep going, but behind him, his soldiers stood silently, waiting for his decision. Alexander knew he could not force them to follow him any further. If he did, they might rebel, and all that he had built could fall apart. His mind was a storm of thoughts, but finally he sighed and turned to face his men. "We will turn back," he said. The soldiers exhaled with relief. Some smiled, others wept. They had marched to the edge of the known world and survived. But for Alexander, it was a bittersweet moment. He had achieved so much, but in his heart, he felt as if he had failed. His dream of conquering the entire world had ended. For now. As the army began its journey back west, Alexander remained quiet. He thought of the battles they had won, the cities they had built, and the men they had lost. He had created an empire larger than anyone could have imagined. But at what cost? As they crossed the desert once more, the sun setting behind them, Alexander knew that his story was not over. He had won many battles, but the greatest challenge, the challenge of holding his empire together, was yet to come. And as the winds whispered across the sand, Alexander the Great rode on, his eyes looking toward the future, still searching for what lay beyond. Chapter 12. A Legacy That Lives Forever. The sun blazed over the city of Babylon. Its golden rays reflected off the palace walls, where Alexander lay in his room, weak and feverish. The same man who had once led armies across deserts and mountains now struggled to lift his head. His breath was shallow. His skin burned. His soldiers, friends, and generals waited outside, praying for a miracle. But deep down, they knew. Alexander's time was running out. His loyal friend Hephaestion had died just months before, and Alexander had been devastated. Some said he had never fully recovered from the grief. Others believed the strain of years of battle had finally caught up with him. Either way, the man who had once seemed invincible was now lying on a bed, surrounded by silence. Alexander's eyes fluttered open. His vision was blurred, but he could see the faces of his generals standing over him. Parmenion, Perdiccas, and others who had fought by his side for years. They leaned in closer, desperate to hear his final words. Someone asked, "Who will inherit your empire?" For a moment, Alexander didn't respond. Then, with a faint smile, he whispered, "To the strongest." Those were the last words he ever spoke. The room fell silent. The world had just lost one of its greatest leaders. Outside, the news spread quickly. Soldiers wept. Citizens gathered in the streets, lighting candles. Some refused to believe it. How could the man who had never lost a battle lose to death? Alexander was only 32 years old when he died, but in his short life, he had changed the world. His empire stretched from Greece to Egypt, across Persia and into India. No man had ever conquered so much, so fast. But his legacy wasn't just about land. It was about the ideas, culture, and people he brought together. After his death, his empire was thrown into chaos. His generals, once united under his leadership, began to fight over who should rule. The empire was eventually divided into several kingdoms, each ruled by one of his former commanders. These were known as the Hellenistic kingdoms, Egypt under Ptolemy, Macedonia under Antipater, and Asia under Seleucus. Though the empire was no longer whole, Alexander's influence remained. One of his most lasting contributions was the spread of Greek culture. As Alexander's army marched across different regions, they built cities, theaters, and libraries. The most famous of these cities was Alexandria in Egypt. Under the rule of the Ptolemies, it became a center of knowledge, home to the Library of Alexandria, one of the largest libraries of the ancient world. Scholars, poets, and scientists from different cultures gathered there to exchange ideas and create new knowledge. Greek architecture, language, and customs mixed with local traditions, creating a new cultural blend known as Hellenism. In cities across the former empire, people spoke Greek, wore Greek-style clothing, and followed Greek customs. But at the same time, Greek culture absorbed aspects of the local traditions. This cultural fusion enriched the world and influenced future generations. But Alexander's legacy wasn't just about culture. His military tactics were studied for centuries by generals and military leaders around the world. His ability to adapt to different battlefields, think quickly, and inspire his men made him a model for future leaders. Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and many others admired and studied his strategies. Yet, his legacy was also complicated. His ambition had brought great success, but it had also caused suffering. Many soldiers had died during his campaigns. Entire cities had been destroyed. People had been displaced, and rebellions had broken out in regions that didn't want to be ruled by foreign leaders. Not everyone viewed Alexander as a hero. To some, he was a conqueror who brought destruction. Even his closest generals had mixed feelings about him after his death. Some admired his vision and courage. Others resented the fact that he had pushed them to the brink of exhaustion. He had led them through brutal deserts, dangerous mountains, and endless battles. And in the end, they were left with a fractured empire and no clear leader to follow. But perhaps Alexander's greatest legacy was the idea of unity. He dreamed of a world where different cultures could come together and learn from one another. He believed that Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and others could live side by side as equals. He even encouraged his men to marry women from the lands they conquered, hoping to create a new generation that was neither fully Greek nor fully Persian, but a mix of both. Though his dream of a unified empire died with him, the seeds of that vision lived on. The cultural exchanges he promoted continued to shape the ancient world. Trade routes between the East and West remained open, allowing goods, ideas, and technology to flow across continents. Years after his death, poets and historians wrote about his life, turning him into a legend. Stories of his bravery, his cleverness, and his bold decisions spread across the world. Some even said that he was not just a man, but a hero. Statues of Alexander were built in cities far and wide, and his name became a symbol of greatness. In Macedonia, mothers told their children stories about how Alexander had tamed a wild horse when he was just a boy. And in Persia, even those who had fought against him admitted that he had been a brilliant leader. Today, more than 2,000 years later, Alexander's legacy is still felt. His empire may be gone, but the impact of his conquests remains. The ideas he spread helped shape modern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. His military tactics are still studied in military academies, and his story continues to inspire people who dream of greatness. As the world changed, Alexander's name never faded from history. His story is told in classrooms, museums, and books. His life serves as a reminder of what humans can achieve when they dream big and refuse to give up. And so, the boy with a lion's heart, who once tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus, lives on, not just in statues or stories, but in the way the world grew, learned, and changed because of him. Alexander the Great was gone, but his legacy would live forever.